That day, I was sitting in the park, opening my lunch container. I noticed a thin, homeless elderly man with tired eyes. I split my sandwich in two and gave him one half. He took it without a word. Then, out of nowhere, he passed me a scrap of paper with a phone number scribbled on it, muttering just, "Call me when you really need an escape." A couple of days passed before I chose to dial him and set up a meeting. In a quiet coffee shop. He was already there, his stare firm and determined. He locked eyes with me and stated, "I know they've stripped you of everything. Join me. We'll make those folks suffer and reclaim what's yours." Right then, I understood that the moment to pursue fairness for myself and my infant son had come. My name is Michael Hayes. To make sense of why I'm here facing this enigmatic old man with intense eyes and a chilling vow, I must share my tale from the start, from my earliest years, from the rundown blocks where I grew up with ambitions larger than the crumbling ceilings. I came into the world in a blue-collar area on the south side of Chicago, Illinois, where the scent of factory smoke and the blare of train whistles merged into a constant rhythm of existence. Our tiny home was squeezed onto a cramped avenue with faded paint and a ceiling that dripped whenever storms hit. My dad, Robert Hayes, was a repairman. He had tough, roughened palms, but they were incredibly precise when handling a screwdriver or pliers. My mom, Margaret, juggled two positions to prevent our household from sinking into complete hardship. During the day, she instructed part-time at a local primary school, and at night, she served behind the register at a modest eatery, where the aroma of oil and the rattle of plates went on without end. Our place was tight, with only a small sitting area, a compact cooking space, and two sleeping quarters where cold drafts seeped through the gaps each winter. But even in the midst of scarcity, that home overflowed with affection. I can still picture the nights when my dad lounged in his faded recliner, sharing tales from his younger days while my mom gently hummed tunes she'd picked up from her grandma. They lacked material wealth, but they had me, and I had them. That was sufficient for us. From an early age, I grasped the cruelty of the outside world. One time, I tagged along with my dad to a grand estate in a fancy suburb to repair some wiring. The owner, a guy in a shiny outfit, gazed at my dad like he was a blemish on a pricey carpet. He scolded my dad for taking too long, despite my dad laboring non-stop for hours. I stood there, a 9-year-old kid, tightening my hands into balls, sensing the heat rise to my cheeks. My dad simply lowered his gaze quietly and continued the task. But as we departed, he clasped my hand and said, "Michael, as long as you remain truthful and put in the effort, lacking money isn't a disgrace. Don't allow them to belittle you." Those phrases carved themselves into my thoughts. My mom frequently repeated similar ideas, particularly when she returned with sore legs after an evening shift. "My sweet child," she'd say, her weary gaze still glowing. "Learning is the doorway. Focus on your studies, and you'll get the opportunity to transform your existence, not only for yourself, but for us as well." I took in her advice and soaked it up. I knew I didn't want my parents to ever submit to anyone again. I desired for them to enjoy an easier existence, without fretting over every cent for pills or power costs. I dove into my education like a thirsty traveler hunting for a river. At school, I consistently ranked at the top, even in second-hand outfits my mom mended from my relatives' cast-offs. I ignored it when the affluent children teased my scuffed sneakers or ragged knapsack. I immersed myself in textbooks, calculations, and stories, convinced it was the sole path out of want. Every evening, I pored over lessons beneath the faint glow of a weak table light while my mom sat nearby, reviewing my assignments with a beaming grin. My dad would fetch discarded volumes from his customers' homes, piling them in a spot in my chamber. "Wisdom is something nobody can snatch from you," he remarked. But existence wasn't always brimming with lovely visions. I recall when I was 14, my mom became gravely sick. She had to skip work for a full week, and our slim reserves vanished rapidly. My dad toiled around the clock, but it still fell short for her treatment. I quietly visited a local market to request employment. The proprietor, a strict fellow, eyed me top to bottom and scoffed. "A broke youngster like you. What could you possibly contribute?" I stayed silent, dipped my head, and walked away. But that evening, when my mom embraced me and assured she'd recover, I pledged to myself I would never permit anyone to demean my kin again. I would labor, I would learn, and someday I would force them to view us in a new light. When I reached 17, I secured a grant to an elite secondary school in another section of the city. It marked my initial venture into an entirely alien realm where youngsters arrived in personal vehicles, donned costly attire, and chatted about trips to the West Coast as if they were routine. I felt misplaced, like a bird tossed into a desert. But I refused to stumble. I studied relentlessly, demonstrating my worth gradually. Those endeavors gained me a college award. University proved even tougher, but I endured and ultimately earned a diploma in economics from a renowned academy. The day I crossed the platform to claim my certificate, my parents occupied the rear seats. My mom wept endlessly, and my dad squeezed my palm firmly, uttering only, "You are our utmost honor." Following completion, I launched my career hunt, equipped with a distinguished credential from a top institution. I felt assured I'd soon secure my spot. I dispatched submissions to numerous firms, from minor lenders to vast enterprises. But the employment scene was more brutal than I'd pictured. Denial notices arrived repeatedly, each one a blow to my aspirations. One time, a hiring agent scanned me thoroughly, his critical stare pausing on the outdated formal shirt I'd loaned from a buddy. "Where do you hail from?" he inquired, his manner tinged with doubt. "The South Side," I answered, striving to maintain composure. He offered a slight grin and said, "Thanks, we'll contact you." But I realized they never would. Then, by a twist of fortune, a prospect emerged. Carter Enterprises, a famous multifaceted finance and venture giant, approved my request. I still recall the interview day, my pulse racing as I entered their soaring tower in downtown Chicago with its shining metal panels and sleek stone surfaces. I felt insignificant, like a stranger adrift amid lavish attire and dialogues packed with advanced economic terms. But when I faced the evaluation group, I gathered all my bravery, responding to each query with the assurance sharpened by years of tireless pursuit. They inclined their heads, jotted remarks, and ultimately, I was employed in the asset review division. The initial pay wasn't substantial, but for a lad from the South Side, it was a pivotal achievement. My beginning period at Carter Enterprises was demanding. I functioned like a robot. I showed up ahead of time, departed after hours, verified every figure, examined every summary, and permitted no error to escape. I aimed to show I fit in, that my origins in the rundown areas didn't limit me. Slowly, my coworkers started acknowledging me. They labeled me the diligent fellow, and some even requested I examine their summaries. I felt gratified, but I couldn't disregard the truth. At Carter Enterprises, I remained an outsider. Social bias was evident as sunlight. Coworkers from rich lineages, schooled at elite colleges, received different treatment. They dined at fancy spots, discussed getaways in the Rockies or their kin's boats. Meanwhile, I carried meals made by my mom, consumed hastily in the lounge, and attempted to overlook the inquisitive looks or murmurs at my rear. One occasion, a coworker named Alex, the offspring of a finance leader, glanced at me and sneered. From the south side, "Hey, how did you land here? Must be chance." I grinned, suppressing my fury, and persisted with my duties. I understood that to endure there, I couldn't allow feelings to dominate logic. Nevertheless, the position at Carter Enterprises genuinely altered my existence. I leased a modest flat close to the workplace for ease, and with a consistent income, I commenced forwarding funds to my parents routinely. I still remember the initial occasion I delivered a fresh television to our little dwelling on the south side. My mom's gaze brightened as she viewed it, though she teasingly reprimanded me. "Michael, you don't have to purchase these items. As long as you're well and succeeding, I'm content." My dad simply tapped my arm, silent, but his gaze brimmed with admiration. I also assisted with my mom's prescriptions and repaired the dripping ceiling. For the first time in ages, I witnessed my parents grin more frequently. Those instances rendered every bit of fatigue and every patronizing stare at the job worthwhile. I started ascending the hierarchy. From a reviewer, I was assigned more vital initiatives and participated in sessions with key customers. My supervisor, Mr. Thompson, a strict yet equitable middle-aged gentleman, once summoned me to his space and said, "Michael, you've got the potential. Don't permit anyone to hinder you." His statement was like an energy boost. I toiled more intensely, absorbed knowledge steadily, and progressively became a central figure in the group. Co-workers began respecting me, no longer referring to me as the lad from the south side, but not all regarded me kindly. The two sons of the firm's head, James Carter and David Carter, made it obvious that social bias would never vanish. James, the older one, was a haughty individual with combed-back locks and a tone oozing superiority. David, the junior sibling, was idle, perpetually depending on the family title to conceal his incompetence. Both viewed me as if I didn't fit in their sphere. During a group discussion, James intentionally quizzed about my origins before everyone. "Michael, I heard you were raised in the rundown parts." "Correct. How does someone like you wind up at Carter Enterprises?" The space grew quiet, all attention on me. I smiled serenely and responded, "I arrived via skill, Mr. James." "What about you?" A handful of co-workers snickered, but James didn't. From that instant, I knew I had turned into an irritation to him. Still, I didn't allow it to trouble me. I continued laboring, seeing my parents on weekends, delivering supplies and anecdotes about my position. My mom would embrace me stating she prayed daily for my well-being. My dad would recount ancient tales as if to prompt me that regardless of my progress, I was still the boy from the south side nurtured in a dwelling full of warmth. But all shifted when I encountered Emily Carter, the sole daughter of the firm's head, William Carter. It occurred at the firm's 60th anniversary celebration, where Emily emerged in a plain blue gown, standing out like a ray of hope amid the refined outfits and artificial grins. I was positioned in the side of the venue, clutching a cup of juice, attempting to merge into the unfamiliar setting of the gathering. I wasn't accustomed to such events where folks chuckled and discussed vessels and trips to California as if they were ordinary. But when Emily's gaze connected with mine, I sensed an odd comfort. She approached, her grin soft yet lacking conceit. "You're Michael, aren't you?" she questioned, her tone crisp like a chime. I nodded, somewhat flustered, not anticipating the head's daughter to recognize my name. We commenced conversing. Emily inquired about my tasks, the economic evaluations I handled, and I was astonished by the genuineness in her attention. She differed from the rest of the Carter kin. No hint of James's haughtiness or David's sloth. She was smart, keen, yet brimming with feeling, as if she comprehended the hardships I never voiced. Our dialogue extended longer than I foreseen, and by the celebration's close, I realized I had grinned more in those brief hours than in the whole prior month. In the ensuing days, Emily and I crossed paths more often, occasionally in the workplace corridors, sometimes in the dining area. She always discovered a means to initiate a chat, and although I attempted to maintain separation, I couldn't withstand her allure. We began encountering outside employment, exchanging quick Java pauses at a tiny spot near the workplace. There, Emily discussed her aspiration to flee the dazzling but oppressive realm of her kin, while I recounted tales about my parents in our confined dwelling on the South Side. I started to perceive that Emily wasn't merely the offspring of a mighty lineage. She was a lady with an independent soul, longing to exist genuinely. Affection arrived like a soft wind, mild yet potent. I don't recall the precise instant I fell for Emily, but it could have been when she seized my palm amid an abrupt rainstorm as we dashed for shelter. She chuckled heartily, her tresses drenched, and remarked, "Michael, I adore instances like this. No pretense required. Just us." In that instant, I knew my soul was hers, but I also recognized this affection wouldn't be simple. Emily was William Carter's daughter, and I was merely a fellow from the rundown areas. No matter my diligence, I could never wipe away the gap between our realms. Gossip about us circulated swiftly through the firm. The curious stares and murmurs behind me intensified. James and David, especially, didn't conceal their disdain. One time, James trapped me in a passageway, his tone frigid. "Who do you believe you are?" "Michael, a rundown kid fantasizing about my sibling. Don't force me to show you your position." I tightened my hands, fighting to remain composed. But inwardly, a tempest brewed. Then my greatest dread materialized. One afternoon, Emily phoned me to a garden near the workplace, her gaze reddened but steadfast. "Dad is aware of us," she stated, her tone quivering. "He declared if I don't terminate it with you, he'll dismiss you. Moreover, he warned to sever all my monetary aid." My veins chilled. I knew William Carter was a dominant figure who wouldn't pause to employ any tactics to safeguard his kin's standing. But when I gazed into Emily's eyes, I observed her resolve. "I'm not scared, and I disregard what they do. I adore you, and I desire to be with you." Her phrases softened my core, but also instilled terror. I didn't wish Emily to forfeit all due to me. I had witnessed my parents endure a lifetime in want, and I didn't want Emily to face that. But she clasped my palm more firmly than before and stated, "We'll surmount this together. Michael, I trust you." In that instant, I knew I couldn't retreat. I cherished Emily, and I would battle to retain her beside me, even if it entailed confronting the globe. We resolved to wed despite all resistance. When I proposed, Emily embraced me, tears flowing down her face, but a brilliant grin on her mouth. "Possessing you is sufficient," she stated. But the Carter kin didn't share the sentiment. William called me to his workspace, a lavish chamber decorated with costly artworks and views overlooking Chicago's horizon. He positioned behind his workstation, his stare icy and penetrating. "Do you think you're deserving of my daughter?" "Michael," he questioned, his tone subdued but authoritative. "You don't fit in this sphere. If you continue, I'll ensure you lose all. Your position, your repute, all." I stood erect, meeting his gaze. Sir, I cherish Emily, and I won't permit anyone to separate her from me. 3 months later, we conducted our ceremony in a modest, plain, but cozy chapel. Only a handful of intimate companions, my parents and my kin, attended. My mom, in a simple yet thoughtfully selected outfit, embraced Emily and said, "You're the honor of our kin. Look after my son." "All right," Emily sobbed, holding my mom closely. My dad tapped my arm, his gaze full of admiration, but shaded with concern. Not one Carter kin member appeared. No good wishes, no looks. They regarded our union as a blemish, a shame to the kin, as James had once yelled in my face. After the ceremony, Emily and I relocated to a small unit in the outskirts. It wasn't opulent, but it was our abode. Every night, as Emily rested in my embrace, I felt like the most fortunate man living. But deep inside, I knew the tempest hadn't concluded. William Carter wasn't the type to release matters effortlessly. The tempest struck merely a few weeks post our union. One morning upon reaching the workplace, Mr. Thompson, the supervisor who had always backed me, summoned me to his space. He regarded me, his gaze burdened. "Michael," he stated, his tone subdued. "You're terminated. It's a directive from higher up." I attempted to argue, but no one can oppose William Carter. I stood there sensing as if the ground had vanished beneath me. I wasn't shocked. I had foreseen William's reprisal, but the feeling of having the position I had invested my effort and emotions into torn away still sliced like a blade through my core. I went back to our unit, attempting to preserve a serene look to avoid alarming Emily. But she sensed. Emily always sensed. She was seated on the couch, her gaze vivid but packed with worry. "Michael, what's amiss? You're not fine, I can tell." I exhaled, drew her into my embrace, and revealed all. She clasped my palm, holding it so securely I could sense her heartbeat's rhythm. "We'll overcome this, Michael," she stated, her tone unwavering. "They can seize your position, but they can't seize our affection." But the Carter kin wasn't finished. Soon after, Emily got a note from her dad. William announced he was halting all monetary assistance, accounts, plastic cards, even her legacy. "You selected a worthless beggar," the note stated, its manner as cold and keen as a knife. "You will suffer for your idiocy." Emily perused the note, her palms shaking, then ripped it apart. "They're not my kin," she stated, tears cascading down her cheeks. "You and your parents are my true kin." I held her, striving to conceal the dread eating at my core. I plunged into seeking a fresh position, dispatching requests everywhere from minor economic outfits to large organizations. But each time the entrances closed firmly before me. One hiring agent was direct. "Michael, you possess a solid background, but nobody risks employing you. You've offended the Carters. They hold more sway than you comprehend." I gradually grasped that William and his kin had utilized their clout to rig the setup, obstructing me from any respectable employment. We endured on Emily's slim reserves and minor borrowings from my parents. But with every day, our prospects dimmed. Amid those difficulties, a glimmer of happiness came unannounced. Emily was expecting. When she informed me in our small cooking area, it was as if the entire globe illuminated. I knelt, embraced her, tears sliding down my cheeks. "We're having a child." "Thank heaven," I murmured, my tone choked with feeling. She grinned, placing my palm on her abdomen. "A boy," she stated, her gaze twinkling. I want to call him Jack after my grandpa, the only individual in my kin who ever genuinely cared for me. I agreed, sensing a wave of fresh vigor. But that happiness didn't endure. As Emily reached her 7th month of expectancy, she started to falter. She was frequently drained, occasionally collapsing without reason. I brought her to the medical center, my heart thumping with anxiety. The physicians indicated she had an uncommon but perilous expectancy issue. "We'll exert all efforts," they stated, but I detected the discomfort in their gazes. I clasped Emily's palm, attempting to remain steady, but inwardly a gale raged. I couldn't forfeit her. I simply couldn't. The day Emily entered delivery, I remained beside her in the birthing chamber, gripping her palm, imploring with every fragment of belief I possessed. But then the physician drew me aside, his tone quivering. "Michael, we face a crisis. Emily's state is severe. We might only rescue the mom or the infant." The globe appeared to crumble under me. "Rescue Emily," I almost yelled, my tone fracturing with urgency. "Rescue my spouse, please." In alarm, I hurried back to the birthing chamber. Emily lay there, her complexion ashen, her respiration weak. She appeared to detect something. She fought to lift her lids, her shaking palm reaching for mine, whispering, "Michael, you must rescue our baby. Vow to me you'll safeguard Jack." I shook my head, tears dropping like precipitation, incapable of accepting the idea of losing her. But Emily pressed my palm tightly, her tone feeble but determined. "Allow me to do this for our child. You must be sturdy for Jack." I fell beside her bed, weeping like a youngster. Every moment felt like a fatal verdict. Then the physicians issued their ultimate choice. Jack was born, a small but robust boy with bright eyes identical to his mom's. But Emily, the lady I cherished more than existence, was lost eternally. I sat immobile, cradling Jack in my arms, sensing my core fragment. She had given up all to grant our son life, and I, powerless, could do nothing to preserve her. Emily's burial occurred on a stormy day. I positioned by her casket, attempting to prevent myself from collapsing. My parents arrived standing quietly next to me, my mom cradling Jack and sobbing. The Carter kin appeared as well, but not to grieve. James neared, his gaze brimming with scorn. "This is the outcome of your folly, Michael. That kid is a mark, a tainted lineage." David positioned nearby, smirking. "You ought to depart before matters worsen." Even William, with his frosty attitude, regarded my parents and stated, "Your kin is a shame, nurturing a son who dared to pollute the Carter blood." My dad lowered his gaze, clasping my mom's palm, striving to remain composed. My mom clutched Jack more securely, as if protecting him from those poisonous phrases. I stood there, fury surging but impotent to respond. Deep inside me, a blaze started to ignite, not of animosity, but of resolve. I vowed I wouldn't permit the Carters to keep crushing the folks I cherished. I would shield Jack, and I would force them to atone for what they had inflicted on Emily, on me, and on our kin. After the burial, I brought Jack back to my parents' modest dwelling on the south side. The unit Emily and I had termed our home was now merely a hurtful recollection. I couldn't manage to retain it, nor could I endure confronting the surfaces that still retained her comfort. My parents accepted us without a term of blame, only quiet embraces and gazes filled with grief. My mom, with her delicate palms, rocked Jack and hummed to him in the same melodious tone she used to hum to me as a child. My dad silently repaired an ancient cradle in the home's corner, the one he had crafted for me 25 years prior. "Remain here, Michael," he stated, his tone subdued but solid. "Kin is for supporting one another." But I knew I couldn't depend on my parents indefinitely. They were aging, their well-being declining, and their slim reserves were scarcely adequate for their treatments and daily costs. I had to rise to discover a means to support Jack and tend to my parents. I recommenced the employment search. I knew the Carters had employed their sway to guarantee I wouldn't locate any reasonable compensating role in Chicago. So, I resorted to miscellaneous tasks, transporting parcels, serving meals, even serving as an evening guard at a market. Every day. I departed home before dawn and returned when Jack was already slumbering in my mom's arms. The scant funds I gained were just sufficient for Jack's nourishment and to settle the service charges. Some evenings I positioned by his cradle observing his small face and experienced an unspeakable ache. Jack possessed Emily's eyes, vivid, tender, and brimming with vitality. Every time I gazed into them, it was as if Emily were prompting me. Be sturdy for Jack. My existence turned into a ceaseless loop of weariness and letdown. I labored 18 hours daily, but it never sufficed to sustain my kin. My mom began hacking more often, and my dad, though he attempted to mask it, couldn't hide the spinal discomfort that tormented him whenever he tried to mend something in the dwelling. I delivered home money, but it vanished swiftly into remedies, supplies, and accumulating charges. One time I had to vend the timepiece Emily had presented me, a present she acquired with her final reserves before her kin severed her. As I passed the timepiece to the purchaser, it felt like I was vending a portion of my core, but I had no alternative. Jack required sustenance, and my parents needed to survive. In my most vulnerable instances, I doubted if I was acting correctly. I had battled for affection, defying all bias. But the price was Emily's existence, and now I was pulling my whole kin into the gale. Some evenings when Jack wailed for sustenance, I couldn't purchase it immediately. I positioned in the kitchen's corner, my head buried on the surface, sensing more powerless than ever. I yearned for Emily, her grin, the manner she clasped my palm and stated we'd conquer all. But now she was absent, and I was left with Jack, a small, blameless child who relied wholly on me. An internal struggle gnawed at me daily. I cherished Jack, cherished my parents, but I couldn't endure the sensation that I was disappointing them. I longed to grant Jack a superior existence, to allow my parents to relax after years of struggle, but I didn't know where to commence. One time when I gazed in the reflector, I scarcely identified myself. Shadows beneath my eyes, messy locks, a hollow face eroded by fatigue. I pondered, was this still the Michael that Emily cherished? Was this still the man who vowed to alter his kin's existence? But amid that gloom, a dim spark still glimmered. It was in my mom's grin, weary but affectionate as she held Jack. It was in my dad, despite his spinal ache, recounting ancient tales to soothe me. And it was in Jack, only a few months old, grasping my digit and grinning, a pure grin, identical to Emily's. Those instances reminded me of my parents' lessons, honesty and endurance. Michael, those are things nobody can snatch from you. I knew I couldn't surrender. I began pursuing minor chances, anything that could assist me regain stability. I accepted additional evening duties, registered in complimentary digital classes to update my economic expertise, hoping that someday I'd discover an exit. I didn't know how to challenge the Carter kin, but I knew I couldn't permit them to triumph. The pledge I made under the downpour at Emily's burial still smoldered within me. And then one destined night, fate intervened in a manner I never foresaw. Through an enigmatic elderly man, a wrinkled scrap of paper, and a vow that could transform all. I still recall that moment vividly on a gloomy afternoon in the garden. In my grasp was a sandwich I had grabbed quickly. Spotting a homeless elderly man curled on a seat, my gut tightened. Without much consideration, I divided the sandwich in two and presented him a portion. He accepted it, his quivering palms contrasting with his remarkably keen eyes, as if they could pierce my essence. Then wordlessly, he extracted a scrap of paper with a scripted contact number. "Dial me," he stated, his tone subdued and mysterious. "When you genuinely require an exit." I stowed the paper in my pouch, thinking it was merely a peculiar act of thanks. But when I returned to the dwelling, drained after an evening duty, I couldn't cease contemplating his phrases. An exit, something I desired more than anything. That evening, I positioned in my parents' small cooking area, the faint golden illumination casting silhouettes on the wrinkled paper. Jack was deeply asleep in the adjacent chamber. My parents had retired, but I knew my mom only dozed intermittently to monitor Jack, while my dad concealed the spinal ache he experienced while mending our dripping ceiling. I couldn't permit them to persist existing like this. Couldn't allow Jack to mature in the same want I had. I lifted the device, my digits pausing over the buttons. Ultimately, I entered the number, my pulse thumping as if I were positioned at a pivotal juncture. The device rang several times before a serene, profound tone responded, "I've been anticipating your contact." I inhaled deeply, striving to maintain steadiness. "I'm Michael," I stated. "We encountered at the garden. You instructed me to contact when I needed an exit." The elderly man laughed gently, a raspy but not harsh noise. "Meet me tomorrow at the coffee shop on Elm Avenue, 10:00 a.m. Don't delay." Then he disconnected, leaving me with a torrent of inquiries and a strange sensation, as if I had just entered a contest whose guidelines I didn't yet grasp. The following morning, I reached the coffee shop, an aged venue with scuffed timber surfaces and the subtle scent of brewed Java. The spot was almost vacant, with only a scattering of patrons. The elderly man was already present, nestled in a nook, donning a gray overcoat and a knit hat drawn low over part of his face. But his eyes, keen and determined, captured my attention. I seated across from him, sensing as if I were commencing a perilous strategy session. "Thanks for arriving, Michael," he stated, pushing a tumbler of liquid toward me. "I know you're at the lowest point, but I also know you're the sole one who can accomplish what I couldn't." I stared at him, my pulse accelerating. "Who are you? And why me?" The elderly man grinned, but it was a sorrowful grin weighted with recollections. He gradually lifted his hat, exposing a rugged face marked with profound creases. "I am Henry Carter," he stated, his tone stable but charged with feeling, "the creator of Carter Enterprises and Emily's grandpa." It felt as if the atmosphere had been drained from the space. Henry Carter, a title that lingered only in remote, firm anecdotes, a overlooked icon. Emily had mentioned him, the only individual in her kin who cared for her without conditions. "My grandpa was the finest person I ever encountered," she once stated, her gaze sparkling. "But my dad expelled him from the kin. I never envisioned I'd encounter him, let alone that he'd emerge in my existence at this juncture." Henry commenced speaking, his tone fluctuating like the sheets of an aged volume being unveiled. He had constructed Carter Enterprises from scratch with a vision of establishing a heritage for his kin. But his offspring and daughter-in-law deceived him. They deceived him into transferring his holdings, defamed him, and compelled him out of the firm. "I forfeit it all, Michael," he stated, his stare remote. "The firm, my dignity, my kin, but I never ceased observing. I knew about you from your period at Carter Enterprises. I observed your honesty, the way you cherished Emily, despite all bias. And when you forfeited her, I knew you were the sole one with sufficient motive to dismantle William." Henry halted, then offered a subtle grin. "Our encounter in the garden, it wasn't random. It was my method of contacting you." I positioned there, attempting to absorb his phrases. "Why do you rely on me?" I questioned, my tone with feeling. Henry regarded me directly. "Because you possess what the Carter kin forfeited: endurance and a genuine core. You didn't submit to James and David's offenses. You battled for Emily, and now you're battling for your son. I see in you the blaze I allowed to extinguish." Then he pushed a thick, tattered binder across the surface. I unveiled it, my palms quivering, my pulse racing as I skimmed the sheets. They were restricted files, proof of William diverting funds, establishing dummy firms to wash money, concealing obligations, and rigging markets. There were accounts of dubious mishaps, a competitor's abrupt demise, a reporter who vanished after probing Carter Enterprises in files displaying William corrupting authorities and manipulating governance to conceal controversies. A shiver traveled down my back, not just at the extent of the offenses, but at the mercilessness of the man I once termed my father-in-law. Henry clarified that he had assembled these files over years, existing in concealment to evade William's chase. "The reporters who probed him all vanished," he stated, his tone dropping. I remained quiet because I knew I couldn't confront him solo. "But you, Michael, you have the motivation I missed. You have Jack, and you have Emily's suffering." I clasped the binder firmly, sensing as if it were scorching in my grasp. "If I do this," I stated, my tone quivering, "what will I confront?" Henry met my stare unswervingly. "Genuine obscurity. Michael, William isn't merely avaricious. He's a hunter. He won't pause to ruin anyone obstructing him. But if you don't proceed, you and Jack will exist under his influence eternally. Only by revealing him can your kin have a tomorrow." I positioned in quiet, my thoughts spinning. I considered Jack, the infant who forfeited his mom at birth. I considered my parents who had given up their existences for me. And I considered Emily, her grin, her ultimate pledge: safeguard Jack. I knew I couldn't retreat. This wasn't merely an opportunity to pursue fairness for Emily. It was a proclamation of conflict against a shadowy dominion. I regarded Henry and agreed. "I'll proceed," I stated, my tone more stable than ever. Henry grinned, a grin brimming with optimism, but also vigilance. "Good. But recall, Michael, this will be a prolonged conflict. Once you're committed, there's no withdrawal. We must be cautious. And we only have one opportunity." I departed the coffee shop with the binder stowed securely in my sack, sensing as if I were transporting an activated explosive. Henry had cautioned me not to inform anyone, not even my parents, about what he had disclosed. "William has observers and listeners everywhere," he stated, his tone a subdued murmur. "One incorrect phrase and both of us could vanish just like the others." I agreed, my core heavy. I wasn't terrified for myself, but I dreaded for Jack, the baby maturing in my mom's embrace, and for my parents, who had given up their existences for me. I knew I had to be more vigilant than ever. Back at the dwelling, I discreetly concealed the binder at the wardrobe's base inside an aged container Emily had used to store the affection notes we composed to each other. Each time I unveiled it, her elegant script struck me like a surge, and the ache threatened to overpower me. But now that ache no longer forced me down. Instead, it energized me. Henry and I commenced encountering routinely, always in unobtrusive sights, an isolated garden, a minor restaurant on the city's edge, or an aged, seldom visited archive. He instructed me how to mask my paths, how to interact without leaving evidence. William's no simpleton, he stated during one encounter in the garden as we positioned on a timber seat, feigning to be acquaintances debating the climate. He has a complete web: attorneys, authorities, even individuals in enforcement. If we act impulsively, he'll demolish us before we can utter a word. I attended closely, absorbing every phrase. Henry explained that the files he had provided me were only duplicates, internal logs he had gathered over years. They were sufficient to create a disturbance, but lacked the official validity to withstand in tribunal. "We require the originals," he stated, his gaze keen. "And we require living testifiers, folks who served William, who witnessed his offenses directly, but they're frightened. Michael, they know what occurs to those who dare oppose him." I contemplated his phrases about the reporters who vanished. The dubious mishaps outlined in the binder. A shiver ran down my back, but I refused to let terror dominate. "So, what do we proceed?" I questioned. Henry leaned nearer, his tone falling. "We attack from the obscurity. Gradually, we'll erode William's trustworthiness, make investors question him, shift communal view against him. When the moment is appropriate, we'll deliver the critical strike, the original proof and testifiers. But first, we have to locate them and persuade them to align with us." Henry's approach was distant from straightforward. This wasn't a direct legal action. It was a prolonged, exhausting conflict, demanding tolerance and shrewdness. I, a fellow from the South Side who had only ever known diligence and honesty, now had to learn to navigate in the obscurity, hide my aims, and surpass an adversary 100 times more dominant than me. Henry began directing me into his realm, a realm of concealed links and carefully computed schemes. He presented me to a few individuals he termed partners in the gloom. There was a previous bookkeeper from Carter Enterprises who had operated under William but was dismissed after discovering dubious deals. Now existing under a false title in the outskirts, he consented to aid us on the stipulation that his persona stayed confidential. There was a reporter who had examined Carter Enterprises and barely survived demise in an abrupt vehicle collision. She now existed in concealment, but still clung to vital files she hadn't ventured to release. And there were others. Previous staff betrayed commercial associates, each possessing a fragment of the reality. These encounters always occurred in secrecy, often at night in locations nobody would doubt. I learned to alter my paths daily to inspect for followers, each time I departed the dwelling. I kissed Jack's brow as he slumbered peacefully in his cradle and murmured, "I'll accomplish this, son, for your mother." My mom detected the strain in my gaze but didn't inquire. She only embraced me, stating, "Be cautious, Michael. I trust you." My dad was more silent, but I knew he fretted for me. Henry and I began constructing our scheme. We couldn't prosecute William yet, as he clarified, because the proof wasn't robust enough, and his dominant web would guarantee any legal action was suppressed. "To dismantle a hunter," Henry stated, his gaze keen, "you can't fail. We have one attempt, and it has to strike the core." I gazed into the gloom ahead and told myself, This is only the commencement. During a planned discussion in an aged archive, Henry stated, "We can't assault directly. William has too many supporters. We have to strike from within, catch him unprepared, and make him reveal his own flaws." I agreed, clasping a volume firmly. "So, what's the initial move?" Henry offered a keen, chilly grin. "We disclose a section of the files, just sufficient to incite discomfort, but not enough for him to link it back to us. The media will be our primary tool. They'll perform part of the labor for us, applying stress on Carter Enterprises." That evening, I returned to the dwelling and cradled Jack in my arms. The baby slumbered soundly, his small lips pursed as if immersed in a pleasant vision. I kissed his brow and murmured, "I'll accomplish this, Jack. I'll grant you the tomorrow your mother envisioned." Then I positioned down, unveiled my aged portable computer, and commenced labor. Henry had supplied me with a protected interaction path, a means to namelessly transmit data to a reporter he relied on, someone who had nearly forfeited their existence probing Carter Enterprises. I chose a file from the binder, an internal summary about a dummy firm William used for money washing, along with a few notations about dubious exchanges. I didn't affix my name or leave any evidence. When I pressed transmit, my pulse thumped as if I had just launched the initial volley in a conflict. A few days later, I observed the outcomes. A minor piece emerged in a respected economic journal with the title "Carter Enterprises. Is there something suspicious in their economic summaries?" The piece didn't identify William outright, but it referenced numbers from the file I had transmitted, posing inquiries about the firm's openness. I perused it in the corner of my parents' cooking area, sensing a surge of energy. For the first time, I felt like I was no longer a casualty. I was retaliating. But Carter Enterprises' reply arrived swifter than I anticipated. William, supported by his powerful publicity group, promptly conducted a media session. I viewed it on the screen while my mom rocked Jack in the sitting space. William, in a costly outfit, positioned before the recorders, his tone sleek as an experienced statesman's. "These claims are unfounded," he stated, his gaze cold and penetrating. "This is merely a scheme by rivals to erode the assurance of our investors and patrons. Carter Enterprises has always been open and dedicated to its principles." James and David positioned behind him, agreeing like marionettes. But I could detect the strain in their gazes. Henry contacted me immediately after, his tone thrilled but vigilant through a secure connection. "You performed well, Michael," he stated. "This is just the initial pebble tossed into the pond. The waves will expand, but we must be tolerant. Don't permit them to link it back to you." I agreed, though he couldn't observe me. "They won't discover me," I stated, my tone determined. But deep inside, I knew peril was approaching. In the days that ensued, the waves began to expand. Smaller investors of Carter Enterprises, those beyond William's grasp, started posing inquiries. A few more pieces appeared, delving further into the anomalies in the economic summaries. The press began to notice, and I saw Carter Enterprises' title in titles with growing regularity. Henry and I remained concealed, observing from distance, like silhouettes in the gloom. Each time we encountered, I absorbed more about masking my paths and transmitting data without leaving hints. But my existence was still distant from simple. I persisted with miscellaneous tasks, competing against time to sustain Jack and my parents. Some evenings after returning from a duty, I positioned by Jack's cradle, observing him slumber tranquilly, and felt a creeping terror. I was confronting a dominion, and if I stumbled, it wouldn't just be me who endured. My entire kin would atone. But then I considered Emily. The manner she clasped my palm and stated we'd conquer all. I recalled Henry's phrases, "We only have one attempt," and I told myself I couldn't halt. I continued disclosing files, small fragments at a time, like droplets overflowing a vessel, a summary about a concealed borrowing, an internal message revealing William's corruption of an authority. Each file was a projectile launched from the obscurity aimed at the core of Carter Enterprises. I didn't know if William doubted anything yet, but I could sense the tension in the atmosphere. One time while passing a news vendor, I saw James on the cover page with the title, "Carter Enterprises Head Son Suspected in Deception." I halted, my pulse racing, and purchased the publication. The piece didn't reference me or Henry, but I knew we were rattling their dominion. Henry and I encountered again in a small restaurant on the city's edge, where the faint illumination and sparse gathering ensured nobody noticed two men positioned in the nook. He regarded me, his gaze a blend of admiration and concern. "You're performing well," he stated. "But from now on, matters will become more perilous. William won't remain passive." I agreed, my palms clenched. "I'm prepared." I responded, though a shapeless terror still stirred within me. But I wouldn't halt until they atoned for what they had inflicted. As a sequence of pieces continued to be released, the environment at Carter Enterprises began to alter. I no longer served there, but through the few ancient companions I retained, I heard murmurs of discomfort within the firm. Investors started raising inquiries at gatherings, demanding clarifications for the dubious numbers in the economic summaries. William, with his formidable group, tried to quench the blazes with refined declarations and elevated assurances. But Henry and I didn't halt. We knew the pieces alone weren't sufficient. We needed a chain of unyielding attacks, each one stronger than the previous, to keep Carter Enterprises unsteady. I began collaborating with a small cluster of reporters Henry relied on. They were folks who had been intimidated by Carter Enterprises, carrying both terror and resolve in their cores. One of them, Sarah, had nearly forfeited her existence in a vehicle collision she believed William had arranged. With her cropped gray-tinted locks and determined gaze, she became the guide in releasing our files. "I've been anticipating this day for a long period," she stated when we encountered in a tiny suburb unit where she existed under a false persona. "But Michael, you have to comprehend that once we proceed this, there's no withdrawal. William will pursue us." I agreed, my core thumping. "I know." Then one morning, I activated the screen and saw Carter Enterprises' title broadcast across every information outlet. A primary publication had issued a series of probing pieces with the title, "Carter Enterprises Controversy: Corruption and Concealments at the Summit of Authority." The pieces referenced accounts from a previous staff in the bookkeeping division who had observed William altering numbers to hide obligations. This was the individual Henry had convinced to emerge under the assurance of namelessness. A press gale erupted. Pieces emerged like growths after precipitation from economic periodicals to nationwide information sources. Each day brought fresh disclosures. A dummy firm revealed a suspected corruption to an authority. An associate withdrawing from an agreement with Carter Enterprises over controversy worries. The firm's market value began to drop, and I heard that primary investors were conducting confidential gatherings demanding responses from William. On communal platforms, the information spread like flames with thousands distributing pieces and questioning the firm's openness. Meanwhile, testifiers who had once remained quiet began to voice. Another previous bookkeeper dismissed by William for refusing to approve a falsified summary contacted Sarah and supplied more proof. A previous commercial associate of Carter Enterprises, deceived by William in a pact, appeared on a broadcast show publicly critiquing the firm. And then something I hadn't foreseen occurred. A reporter who had vanished after probing Carter Enterprises turned out to be surviving. She appeared in a nameless discussion recounting how she had been intimidated and compelled to enter concealment. These tales, each a small fragment of the enigma, combined to form a clear image of William Carter's avarice and mercilessness. The stress from communal view grew enormous. Primary associates of Carter Enterprises began terminating pacts. Fearing connection with the controversy, alarmed investors sold their holdings, causing the firm's worth to tumble. Henry and I remained nameless, allowing the press to perform its labor. Each time I saw William's title on the information, I felt a small portion of fairness being delivered. But I also knew we were entering the most perilous stage. William wouldn't remain passive and observe his dominion crumble. He would retaliate. And when he did, Henry and I had to be prepared. In the days that ensued, the information was dominated by accounts about Carter Enterprises with increasingly keen titles. Carter Enterprises Controversy. Is this the downfall of a dominion or head? William Carter faces stress from investors and probers. I positioned in my parents' small cooking area, my gaze fixed to the display. I knew William was searching for the individual behind the disclosures. One time I received a note from an ancient companion at Carter Enterprises, alerting me that James and David were questioning every staff and had even employed private probers to trace the origin of the files. "Be cautious, Michael," the note read. "They're enraged." My pulse accelerated as I perused it. Then I erased it promptly. I didn't reply, leaving no evidence. The primary investors of Carter Enterprises, once faithful to William, began to hesitate. They no longer trusted his sleek assurances or the refined addresses from his publicity group. An special investors gathering was summoned, and this time it wasn't under William's dominance. Henry received notice from an ancient supporter on the panel, a man who had collaborated with him in the initial days of Carter Enterprises. "They're losing belief," he informed me during a gathering in a small restaurant, his gaze gleaming with optimism. "The investors want to proceed to preserve the firm. This is our opportunity." "Michael." We began readying for the ultimate strike. Henry contacted his supporters, those deceived by William, to assemble more original proof, signed pacts, undeniable messages, and even tapes from a previous aide who had recorded William's confidential gatherings. I labored day and night examining every file, ensuring no errors. On the day of the investors' gathering, Henry and I stayed distant. We couldn't reveal our faces or allow William to know we were behind it all. Instead, we transmitted the original files to Sarah. With a bravery I couldn't help but respect, she forwarded them to a cluster of primary investors and a probing organization. As the gathering commenced, the environment in Carter Enterprises' meeting space was like an explosive container, ready to detonate. I viewed the gathering live through a confidential connection Sarah supplied, William positioned at the platform attempting to preserve his poise. But I could detect the strain in his gaze. The investors, usually quiet and obedient, now rose, confronting him with pointed inquiries. An elder gentleman representing a primary funding group held up a bundle of files, the very proof we had transmitted. "Mr. Carter," he stated, his tone echoing through the hushed space. "How do you clarify these funds, the dummy firms, the corruptions recorded in your own messages?" The space erupted in murmurs and astonished looks. James and David, seated beside their dad, paled. William tried to reply, his tone quivering but still tinged with haughtiness. "This is defamation," he announced, losing his poise. "These files are invented, distributed by rivals to dismantle me. But nobody believed him anymore. Another investor rose and activated a tape, William's distinct tone discussing a corruption to an authority to conceal a controversy. The space fell quiet. The only noise William's uneven respiration through the recorder. Then something I hadn't predicted happened. A primary investor, once an intimate supporter of William, rose and suggested a ballot of no assurance. "We cannot allow Carter Enterprises to collapse because of one man's avarice," he stated. "I propose to eliminate William Carter and his two sons from the panel right away." Cheers erupted, loud and determined. I felt a rush of energy, unable to believe what was unfolding. William tried to yell to regain dominance of the assembly, but nobody attended anymore. The ballot occurred swiftly, and the outcomes were declared. William, James, and David were eliminated from the panel. An interim panel was established, vowing complete cooperation with probers to uncover every controversy. William and his kin were now under intense examination. Probing organizations descended, sifting through every exchange, record, and message to trace the diversion, money washing, and economic deception we had revealed. I imagined William's face, once haughty and unassailable, now facing doubtful stares and inevitable inquiries. In the days following the investors' gathering, the environment in Chicago seemed to quiver with the gale we had unleashed. The press was unyielding, producing tale after tale. Meanwhile, William, James, and David were called before probing organizations, and I heard they had employed a group of expensive attorneys to rescue their standing. But this time, nobody could conceal the reality. The proof we supplied, messages, forged pacts, tapes, was too evident, too sharp to be rejected. Another investors' gathering for Carter Enterprises was planned, and this time, Henry decided it was time for us to emerge. "This is our opportunity to seal the history," he stated, his tone subdued but potent. "I'll share my tale, and you'll share yours. They need to know who's behind all this." I tightened my hands, sensing as if I stood at a destined juncture. The gathering took place in a grand downtown Chicago meeting hall with shining glass panels in an environment as tense as a courtroom. Henry and I arrived ahead, positioning in a nook, observing the assembly of investors, reporters, and members of the interim panel. William, James, and David were missing, under probe, and prohibited from participating. As the gathering commenced, a few longtime investors immediately detected Henry. Though he had departed the firm years prior, and his title seemed consigned to recollection, the myth of Carter Enterprises' creator still lingered in murmurs. Suddenly, a prominent investor stepped to the platform, his tone booming through the hall. "Today, we are privileged to have the presence of the man who established Carter Enterprises. Many of you may never have encountered him, but he is a living myth among us. Please greet Mr. Henry Carter to utter a few phrases." Henry walked to the platform with deliberate steps, an aged man exuding honor, his gaze keen and his tone resonant. "I am Henry Carter," he announced, and the hall grew silent. A few folks murmured, recognizing the legendary title of the man who established Carter Enterprises. I was deceived by my own kin, expelled from the firm I constructed by my son, William Carter. But today, I returned to reveal the truth about his offenses, about the avarice that has sullied Carter Enterprises' heritage. He recounted his tale, how he was tricked into transferring his holdings, defamed and separated. He spoke of his years in concealment, assembling proof, waiting for the chance to reclaim fairness. The hall was hushed, the only sound Henry's potent, emotional tone. Then he regarded me, his gaze signaling, But I didn't accomplish this solo, he stated. There was a young man who forfeited everything because of the Carter kin, yet still ascended to battle. Michael Hayes, please advance. I stepped onto the platform, my core thumping. All gazes were on me, and it felt like the globe was observing. I am Michael Hayes, I stated, my tone quivering initially, but growing stable. I was once a staff of Carter Enterprises, humiliated by William Carter and his sons for my modest origins. I cherished Emily Carter, and she gave up everything to grant us our son, Jack. But the Carter kin took her from me, took my position, and tried to take my sons tomorrow. I shared my tale about my affection for Emily, the Carter kin's resistance and reprisal, her demise, and the months I existed in despair. I spoke of our battle in the obscurity, the files Henry and I had disclosed, the testifiers who had emerged. I didn't accomplish this out of animosity. I stated, regarding directly at the assembly, I accomplished this for fairness, for Emily, for my son, and for everyone the Carter kin has crushed. The hall erupted in cheers. Tears streamed down my cheeks, not from sorrow, but because for the first time, I felt I was no longer isolated. The investors, once quiet under William's rule, now rose, voicing their backing. The press recorded every phrase, and I knew our tale. Henry's and mine would circulate widely. We were no longer silhouettes. We were conquerors. I knew that somewhere William, James, and David were viewing the gathering on a display, and I imagined their faces, astonished, enraged, realizing that the one who dismantled their dominion was me. Michael Hayes, the penniless beggar they once teased. Henry's dignity was restored, and he was invited to rejoin the panel as an honorary consultant. But he refused, regarding me with a proud grin. You're the one who should guide. Michael, he stated. You have the core and the skill Carter Enterprises requires. In a surprising choice, the panel offered me a role on the new guidance team as chief executive. I was astonished, unable to believe that I, a fellow from the poor avenues of the South Side, had been acknowledged and perceived. After my designation, I relocated my parents to a fresh dwelling, not lavish, but comfortable, sufficient for them to exist without fretting about health charges or a dripping ceiling. Jack, my little boy, began maturing in a caring setting with superior tending and sustenance. My mom still shared evening tales with him every night, and in those instances, my core was warmed beyond measure. Each morning when I regarded in the reflector, I no longer saw a shattered man with shadows under his eyes. Instead, I saw a dad, a son, and a man who had battled unyieldingly for fairness. I had kept my pledge to Emily, to Jack, and to myself. But more importantly, I wanted to transmit a message to everyone still struggling in the obscurity. Hold fast to your honesty. Stay enduring, and never surrender. Fairness may arrive delayed, but if you keep battling, it will surely arrive.